Welcome everyone to another NASCAR Heat Evolution setup video. Today's video is going to be about Indianapolis. Now, Indy has some similarities to Pocono, so for those of you who may have already tried the Pocono setup at Indy, you're on the right track, especially when you consider that turn 2 at Pocono, known as the tunnel turn, was actually modeled after Indianapolis, so you can definitely see similarities between the two tracks. So before we get into the setup, let's talk a little bit about lap times and get that out of the way. The AI will run qualifying laps on the pole at max difficulty at about 48.9 seconds. That's 48.9 seconds. Now, the setup I'm showing you here, I was able to use to run laps around 48.2 roughly. In fact, when we get to the couple of laps on replay later on, one of those laps is a 48.22, the other being a 48.19. So we're quite a bit faster than the AI is in qualifying. Of course, they slow down during race pace, so we're well over a second faster than them at race pace. So you're going to have no trouble with the AI. Things might get a little bit more interesting if you use, instead of the 105% AI, if you go up to auto +2 once you get that 105 elite rating. So if you're interested in racing with the AI, try that out. That might give you some interesting racing. But for the most part, you're going to be quite a bit faster than the AI. So let's talk a little bit about the track itself. This track is filled with grip. I mean, there is just grip everywhere. You're going to be able to go a lot faster than you think you will be able to through the corners. Now, turns 1 and 3 are at the ends of the long straightaways. Of course, turn 1 being at the end of the front straightaway, turn 3 being at the end of the back straightaway. Now, what you need to keep in mind here is the most important thing is you won't need to use the brake on entry to these corners. Now, you can. There's obviously nothing wrong with it, especially if you use techniques like trail braking going into the corner, but you don't need to. The way I actually run these corners on 1 and 3 is I figured out that if I hit the entry point right, my turn in point to the corner, all I really need to do is slowly back off the throttle to sometimes all the way off the throttle, sometimes maybe to about 25-30% throttle, and then wait for the car to catch or grip. And the way you'll know it is when you're going through the corner. And again, this is something that's hard to describe, but you'll know when it happens to you. When you get into the corner and you feel the front tires turn, they grip and the car rotates. As soon as that happens, that's when you can get back to the throttle, and you can get back to the throttle hard. So that's really what you're looking for there. You want to, and it'll take some experimentation to see how soon you need to back off going into the corner. In fact, on the very first lap, you'll see in the replay, I actually drove it in, missed my corner turn-in point, so I ran about a half lane to a lane up off the bottom going through that corner. And I wanted to put that in to show you that while most tracks are line sensitive to get it just right, even when you miss your line, it's still possible at this particular track to run a very good lap time. So keep that in mind. Don't feel like it's a throwaway lap just because you miss your entry to a corner. You can still end up with very good lap times, even though you're not on the perfect line. So with 1 and 3, you won't need any braking going in unless you're using some different techniques like trail braking. Let's talk about 2 and 4. 2 and 4 can be run wide open. Just depending on, again, if you get the entry right to these two, you can run them wide open. Now, what you're going to see in the laps I'm going to show you in the replay are not wide open for the most part. There is the first lap, I believe I ran turn 2, I believe it was wide open. It may be turn 4 as well, but lap 2 I did not. So it's not the end of the world if you're not able to run them wide open. The biggest thing is you want to make sure you're carrying maximum speed on exit. That's the vital part. So if you need to breathe the throttle a little bit on the entry of turn 2 or turn 4, then that's perfectly fine. Whatever you need to do to make sure you carry max speed on entry, or excuse me, on exit. So always keep in mind, turn 2 and turn 4 are the most important corners here. And if you need to sacrifice just a little bit on the entry of turn 2 and 4, to make sure you get the exit right, then by all means do it. Because getting the exit to turn 2 and turn 4 correctly will mean that you could carry anywhere from 1 to 3 miles an hour extra down these long straightaways, and that is huge for your lap time. So let's go ahead and talk about the setup itself. You'll notice that the shocks tends across the board, keeping things simple as always. Let's move on to the weight settings. Left side weight is maxed out at 54.2 because this is an oval and we're always turning left. Front weight is quite a bit more than what you're probably used to seeing from me. It's at 51.5%. Now, I want to talk about front weight in conjunction with the next item of wedge. Now, you'll notice that 51.5, as I mentioned, is the highest front weight I've used on any track aside from maybe Talladega or Daytona, which are a totally different case. But the wedge of 45% is quite a bit less than I've used at other tracks. And the reason I want to talk about these two together is because they correspond to one another. If I wanted to use less wedge, then in general, unless the car is just tight, but if you get the car close to where it's handling well and you want to reduce the wedge further, then something good that you can do to counteract that, to keep the car sort of balanced or stable, is to increase the front weight, because these things can work in concert with one another. All right, front weight is going to make the car rotate slower. Okay, it's going to make the car not want to turn as much, especially on corner entry. Okay, with that in mind, what does wedge do? Well, wedge makes the car want to rotate faster. Well, the other thing that wedge wants to do is it wants the car to rotate more overall. So once you turn the car, every bit that you turn the wheel, the car wants to rotate more. So what you can do is use front weight and wedge to balance each other out. And the reason I decided to go with the 45% wedge, which is the minimum in the game, is because I wanted to make sure that because you're turning so much in these corners, I wanted the car to continually rotate throughout the corner, and wanted to make sure that the car didn't want to shove off the corner and really shove the nose or push off the corner. And the way I wanted to do that was to run as low a wedge setting as possible to help the left front tire. And in order to do that, I needed to bump up the front weight in order to keep the car steady, because if you just removed all the wedge from the car that the game will allow without moving weight toward the front or using some other method to tighten up the car would get very unstable, and I didn't want that. I wanted the car to be extremely stable but fast, which is hard to do, but these two items are adjustments that you can make to sort of offset one another and get a good balance there. Front and rear weight are at the minimums as normal, so let's move on to springs. Front springs are really my favorite pairing. 1,200 pounds on the left front. Right front is at 1,000 pounds. So I'm using 200 pounds of split in the front, and that is to help the car to turn on entry. Now, if you're somebody who wants to use the brakes on entry, then beware that using a stiffer left front than right front spring can cause the car to get a little bit erratic under heavy braking. So keep that in mind. You may want to either come down a little bit off the left front or increase the right front a little bit to help stabilize the car under braking if you choose to use the brake on entry. Rear springs, 400 pounds left rear, 500 pounds in right rear. I find that really works out well for me to keep the car stable, particularly on corner exit. Tire settings, 27 pounds on the left side, 30 pounds on the right side. Not very much split at all. And that was mostly because I chose to adjust the setup based around the wedge and front weight. As always, if you want the car to rotate more, then increase the amount of split in between the left side and right side tires. So in this case, you might go up to 35 or even 40 pounds on the right side and see how that affects the car. For me, I ended up not really needing to mess with this a whole lot because of the combination of front weight and wedge. Camber, maxed out on both the left front and right front, 10 degrees positive on the left front and negative 10 degrees on the right front. Front sway bar is at 1.5, which is fairly standard for me. And as always, no reason to really use the rear sway bar. Although I can tell you that if you want to mess around with these two numbers for the sway bar, then what will happen is if you decrease the front sway bar, that will help the car to rotate more. I find that in general, it can also reduce the stability of the car, so be careful with that. Increasing the front sway bar will, in general, make the car tighter. Rear sway bar, as you can see, we're not using it at all, but as you increase this number, it will make the rear of the car want to rotate more. Again, the reason I don't use it is because it can make the car more unstable to me in the feel of the car. But that's just something that could be personal preference only for me. Try it out and see if it works for you. Track bar. Left side is 1 inch higher than the right side, 12 inches on the left, 11 inches on the right. The reason I did that is a higher left side track bar than right side track bar will help the car on entry and particularly through the center of the corner while keeping the car pretty stable on exit. So if you find that the car is too tight for you on the exit, then increase the right side track bar setting. And if the car gets too loose on entry, you can try lowering the left side track bar. Brake bias is at 72%. I did try a little bit of trail braking in the car, and that's a pretty good percentage for me. If you increase the brake bias percentage, that will put more brake to the front of the car, and it will help the car to basically want to go straight on corner entry and can help stabilize if you're getting a little skittish under braking. If you reduce the brake bias number, then it's going to help the car to rotate while you're under braking because it moves more of the brake pressure to the rear of the car. So that is a very good tool, particularly if you're going to use the trail braking technique on corner entry. You can try to reduce that brake bias some, and it really helps the car to rotate on entry. Grill tape at 0%, wheel lock at 10 degrees untouched, and steering offset. You can notice, I believe this is the first setup I've used 0 steering offset. Basically, I found I didn't need it. And when I say I didn't need it, it doesn't mean the car doesn't pull to the left on the straightaway, because it does. But what it means is I couldn't find a good number that would allow the car to basically head straight on the straightaway without the tendency to want to turn to the right. I don't like the car to turn to the right at all on the straightaway, so I stay away, usually a click or two away from even allowing that to happen. In this case, 0 offset seemed to be a good idea. If you find that the car is pulling too hard to the left on the straightaway for you, then go ahead and increase that number by a click or two and see how it works out for you. Gear settings, rear end ratio is at 3.25. I did not touch first through fourth gear ratios. The main thing I look at there basically is that making sure fourth gear is a 1.0 ratio. It's not necessary that you have to do it that way. That's just the way I prefer to set up the transmission. The rear end ratio of 3.25 will get every bit of the RPMs out of this car on the straightaway. In fact, I can see you possibly gaining more speed by lowering that number down closer to 3.0. Maybe try a 3.7 or 3.08, whatever it is that the game allows. Maybe a 310, somewhere in that range, and see if that works out better for you. That can actually help the car to rotate by lowering the RPMs and also help how the car feels as you back off the throttle. Because backing off the throttle in a car like this, running this many RPMs up near 9,000, can actually get the car loose when you back off the throttle. So by using less gear, numerically anyway, something like around a 310 or so here could actually help the car to rotate better, particularly on corner entry. So that's the setup. Stay tuned for the replay of a couple of laps. Again, the first lap is a 48.22. Second lap is a 48.19. And I have to say that I didn't realize I had my microphone on when I was recording these hot laps. Generally, I turn the mic off while I'm doing these laps, and that's just to keep out any miscellaneous noise that might be in the room while I'm recording. But in this case, I forgot and left it on. So during I believe it's the second lap, one of the biggest issues in this game for me is the AI. I do not like it. The more I run around the AI, the less I like it. And not just because they're a good bit slower on pretty much every track. It's not really just about that. That's obviously a problem and takes some of the fun away from it. But how they drive, it just drives me nuts a lot of time. And there's a time where I I try to record these laps when I'm not anywhere around the AI, just because I don't want any drafting to take effect. I don't want any influence of the AI whatsoever. But I was coming off of turn two. Now, again, I believe it's on the second lap. I was coming off of turn two, and I saw that there were about three AI ahead of me that had just come onto the track. And I sort of let out a nice sigh that pretty much encapsulates how I feel about the AI. And I started to cut it out, but then I thought, you know what? I think that pretty much nails how I feel about the AI. So whenever you hear that, yes, I do realize it was in there, and I kind of get a chuckle out of it. So stay tuned for those replays and for more NASCAR Heat Evolution.